March 14th, 2025. 6:47 a.m. Atlanta, Georgia. Vivian Carter's eyes snap open. Her phone won't stop. 37 messages. 42. 51. All from people she hasn't spoken to in years. All sending the same thing. A photo. 3 words. Is this Jennifer? She sits up fast, heart already racing. She clicks the image. A crowded marketplace in Nassau, Bahamas. Tourists everywhere. Bright fruit stands. Noise and color and chaos. And there, in the background, barely visible behind a vendor's table, a young woman holding a toddler. Vivian's breath stops. She zooms in. The image pixelates. The woman's face is turned slightly away, but just below her left ear, clear as day, is a small crescent-shaped birthmark. The same birthmark her daughter had. The daughter the cruise line said drowned 7 years ago. Behind the woman stands a man. His hand rests on her shoulder, possessive, protective. His face is blurred by distance, but something about his posture makes Vivian's stomach drop. She knows that posture. She whispers her daughter's name into the darkness. Jennifer. They told her Jennifer was gone, swept away by the ocean. Another tragic accident on the high seas. The FBI closed the case. She buried an empty casket. But what if they were wrong? What if she wasn't lost? What if she was taken? And what if, after 7 years of grief and guilt and sleepless nights, her daughter has been alive this entire time?
Welcome to True Crime Story Files. Real people, real crimes, real consequences, because every story matters. Subscribe now, turn on the bell, and step inside the world where truth meets tragedy.
Within 3 hours, Vivian is standing in the lobby of the FBI field office in downtown Atlanta without an appointment. She doesn't care. The photo is pulled up on her phone, with the brightness turned all the way up. She shows it to the receptionist, then to a junior agent, then to anyone who will look. Most turn away politely. One suggests she contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Another mentions grief counseling resources. But Vivian doesn't move. Finally, a senior agent named Kevin Bowman agrees to see her. He's in his late 40s with gray at the temples and tired eyes. He's worked missing persons cases for over 2 decades. He's seen desperate families before, heard impossible theories, watched parents chase ghosts. He listens, but his body language says everything. Vivian pulls out her phone and asks for his email. Bowman recites it, and within seconds the photo appears in his inbox. He opens it on his laptop, the image filling his screen. When Vivian finishes explaining, Bowman leans back in his chair and sighs. He pulls up the case file on his computer. Jennifer Marie Carter, 17 years old. Disappeared from the Carnival Dream on June 13, 2018. Last seen around 11 p.m., presumed to have fallen overboard. Somewhere between Miami and Nassau. Search conducted for 72 hours. No body recovered. Case officially closed 14 months later. Bowman speaks carefully, the way you do when you're trying not to hurt someone. Ms. Carter, I understand what you're feeling, but this case was thoroughly investigated. The Coast Guard, Bahamian authorities, our team, everyone concluded the same thing. Your daughter's disappearance was a tragic accident. Vivian's voice cracks, but she doesn't back down. Then explain the photo. Bowman zooms in on the image and studies it for a long moment, examining the woman, the child, the birthmark. Birthmarks aren't unique, he says quietly, and grief can make us see things we want to see. Vivian stands abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I'm not imagining this. That's my daughter. Bowman is about to minimize the image on his screen when Vivian reaches across the desk and taps the trackpad, zooming further into the background. The man, his hand on the woman's shoulder, and then she freezes, her face going pale. "Wait!" Bowman looks up. Vivian's voice is barely a whisper now. "I know him." The room shifts. Bowman sits forward. "What do you mean you know him?" Vivian stares at the blurred figure, her memory pulling something up from 7 years ago. A face, a voice, a moment she dismissed. "He worked on the cruise. I remember now. He was a crew member who helped passengers with their bags. He was polite, friendly. He talked to Jennifer once near the pool deck. I thought it was nothing." Her hands are trembling now. "His name was Daniel Ruiz." Bowman's expression changes instantly. He opens another window on his computer and starts typing fast. Personnel records, employment history, complaints filed during Ruiz's time with Carnival Cruise Line. 3 reports appear on screen. All dismissed, all involving young female passengers. Bowman picks up his phone and calls another agent into the room. "We're reopening this," he says. Over the next 48 hours, the FBI begins a quiet investigation with no media and no announcements, just careful, methodical work. They contact Bahamian law enforcement through the legal attaché office at the U.S. Embassy in Nassau. They request surveillance footage from businesses near the marketplace. They cross-reference the timeline, and Vivian doesn't leave the building. She refuses to go home, refuses to rest. She sleeps on a couch in the waiting area, with her phone clutched in her hand, the photo still glowing on the screen. Bowman warns her about what might come next. "If this is your daughter, Miss Carter, she's been gone a long time. People in situations like this don't always want to be rescued. They've built a life, even if it's built on trauma. She might not recognize you. She might not trust you. She might even defend the person who took her." Vivian's voice is steady. "I don't care. I'm going with you to Nassau." Bowman hesitates, then nods. "We leave in 2 days." Vivian Carter hasn't seen her daughter in 7 years, but now, for the first time since that terrible morning in 2018, she has something she hasn't had in a long time. Hope, and a name. Daniel Ruiz. But as she sits alone in the waiting room that night, one question burns in her mind. If Jennifer has been alive all this time, why didn't she try to come home? June 7th, 2018. Miami, Florida. The Carnival Dream sat docked at Port Miami, its massive white hull gleaming against a cloudless sky. Families streamed up the gangway, pulling suitcases and clutching boarding passes, already wearing their vacation smiles despite the oppressive Florida heat. The air smelled like sunscreen and salt water, and the promise of escape from ordinary life. Vivian Carter and her 17-year-old daughter Jennifer were among them, and Vivian hoped desperately that this trip would be the fresh start they both needed. It had been a brutal year. Jennifer's father had left when she was 12, and the divorce had devastated Vivian in ways she was still trying to understand. Money had been tight ever since, with Vivian working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on and food on the table. She barely slept anymore, and when she did, her dreams were filled with anxiety about bills and mortgage payments, and whether she was failing Jennifer by not being enough. This cruise was something she'd saved for over 18 months, scraping together every spare dollar with the hope that maybe, just maybe, it would help them reconnect as mother and daughter. Jennifer had become so quiet over the past year, retreating into herself in ways that worried Vivian, but that she didn't know how to address. Her daughter didn't talk much anymore, didn't smile the way she used to, didn't seem interested in the things that had once brought her joy. Vivian told herself it was normal teenage behavior, that Jennifer was just growing up and pulling away like teenagers do. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. Jennifer was carrying weight that no 17-year-old should have to carry, and Vivian didn't know how to help her put it down. They boarded the ship and were immediately swept into the chaos of embarkation day. Announcements blared over loudspeakers. Crew members directed foot traffic with practiced efficiency. Kids ran toward the pool deck, their excited screams echoing through the corridors. The smell of pizza wafted from the buffet, mixing with the diesel fumes from the port. It was overwhelming and exciting, and exactly what Vivian had hoped for. A complete departure from their life back in Atlanta. That's when she first noticed Daniel Ruiz. He was standing near the atrium, helping an elderly couple with their carry-on bags. His movements patient and unhurried, despite the crowd pressing around him. He was in his early 30s with clean-cut dark hair, wearing the standard Carnival crew uniform, with a name tag that read Daniel in cheerful blue letters. He laughed at something the elderly man said, his smile warm and genuine as he offered to escort them to their cabin. Vivian watched him for a moment, noting the easy confidence in his movements, the way other passengers seemed to gravitate toward him for help. He was the kind of person you'd trust instinctively, the kind who made you feel like everything would be okay. She thought nothing of it at the time. He was just another helpful crew member doing his job. Over the next 2 days, Daniel Ruiz seemed to be everywhere. He was at the muster drill cracking jokes to ease the tension of families fumbling with life jackets. He was at the poolside bar, delivering drinks with a smile and a kind word. He was in the dining room chatting with passengers about shore excursions, recommending the best spots in Nassau and Cozumel, with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved his job. People responded to him with warmth and trust, and Vivian understood why. He had a gift for making people feel seen and valued. On the afternoon of June 8th, Vivian was sitting on a lounge chair near the main pool, finally cracking open a book she hadn't had time to read in months. Jennifer was a few feet away with earbuds in, scrolling through her phone, even though the ship's Wi-Fi barely worked. It was a peaceful moment, one of the first times Vivian had felt truly relaxed in over a year. Then Daniel walked by carrying a stack of fresh towels. He stopped near Jennifer's chair, and Vivian looked up from her book just as Jennifer pulled out one earbud with a startled expression. "First cruise?" Daniel asked, his voice friendly but not pushy. Jennifer nodded, suddenly shy in the way teenagers get around adults they don't know. "Yeah," she said quietly. Daniel's smile widened, warm and genuine. "You picked a good one. The Dream's got the best crew in the fleet. If you need anything while you're on board, just ask for me." "Daniel, I work guest services, but I'm around pretty much all the time." He glanced at Vivian then, including her in his friendly demeanor. "You two enjoying yourselves so far?" Vivian closed her book and sat up slightly, returning his smile. "We are. It's been really nice, very relaxing." "Good. That's what we like to hear." Vivian thanked him, appreciating the recommendations. He nodded and walked off, towels still balanced on his shoulder, already stopping to help another family a few chairs down. Jennifer put her earbud back in and returned to her phone. And Vivian went back to her book, the moment already fading from her mind. But there had been something. A flicker of unease that crossed Vivian's mind for just a second before vanishing. Something about the way Daniel had looked at Jennifer, or maybe the way he'd specifically approached her chair instead of just walking past. It was nothing concrete, nothing she could articulate, just a tiny whisper in the back of her mind that said, "That's not quite right." She ignored it. The sun was warm. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, and Daniel was just being helpful. That was his job. There was no reason to be suspicious of someone who was simply doing what crew members were supposed to do, making passengers feel welcome. Over the next day, Jennifer saw Daniel a few more times. He brought extra towels to their deck chairs without being asked. He recommended a dessert at dinner that turned out to be delicious. He helped an elderly passenger with directions, his patience and kindness on full display. Each interaction was so normal, so helpful, so professionally appropriate that Vivian stopped noticing him at all. He became part of the background, just another friendly face among the dozens of crew members who made the ship run smoothly. What Vivian didn't see were the other interactions, the way Daniel would happen to be in the same area as Jennifer during the day, the way he'd smile at her from across the dining room, the small notes he'd leave at their cabin, suggesting activities Jennifer might enjoy. The groundwork he was laying, brick by brick, building a foundation of trust and connection that Jennifer didn't even realize was forming. On the evening of June 8th, the ship sailed through calm waters under a sky full of stars. Families gathered on the upper decks for the evening entertainment. Music drifted through the warm night air, mixing with the sound of laughter and splashing from the pool. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, dark and vast and unknowable. Vivian fell asleep in their cabin that night, feeling content, hopeful even. The trip was going well. Jennifer seemed a little more relaxed, a little less withdrawn. Maybe this was exactly what they both needed. Jennifer lay awake in the bed next to her mother's, staring at the ceiling with her earbuds in, trying to drown out the noise in her head. She felt guilty for not being happier, for not appreciating everything her mother had sacrificed to make this trip happen. But happiness felt like something that belonged to other people, not to her. She felt like she was drowning, and the worst part was that nobody seemed to notice. Somewhere on the ship, Daniel Ruiz finished his shift and walked the empty corridors, his mind already working through the next steps of a plan that had been forming since the moment he'd first seen Jennifer at embarkation. He knew what he was doing. He'd done it before, though never this far. But there was something about Jennifer that made him willing to take the risk. She was perfect, vulnerable, lost, looking for someone to see her, and he was very good at making people feel seen. But what was Daniel really planning? And how much time did Jennifer have left? June 9th, 2018. Morning. Cozumel, Mexico. Jennifer stood at the ship's railing, watching passengers stream down the gangway toward the port, their excitement palpable in the warm Mexican air. Inside their cabin, her mother was getting ready for a snorkeling excursion she'd booked weeks ago, one of the highlights she'd been looking forward to for months. Jennifer didn't want to go. She didn't want to pretend to be excited about seeing fish, or swimming in crystal clear water, or any of the other things that were supposed to make this vacation memorable. She just wanted to be left alone with her thoughts, which was impossible when sharing a tiny cabin with someone who was trying so hard to fix her. "Mind if I join you?" The voice startled her, and she turned to find Daniel standing a few feet away in his crisp white uniform, coffee cup in hand, looking like he'd just started his shift. His smile was easy and understanding, like he already knew what she was thinking. "Your mom dragging you snorkeling?" he asked with a knowing tone that made Jennifer feel less alone. She shrugged, not trusting herself to say too much. "She's trying." "But you're not feeling it," Daniel said, and it wasn't a question. He just understood somehow, the way nobody else seemed to. He didn't push or offer unsolicited advice. He just stood there for a moment looking out at the port with her, comfortable in the silence. "If you need a break from the excursion, there's a quiet cafe near the plaza called Las Palmas. Tell them Daniel from the Dream sent you, and they'll take care of you. Sometimes you just need space away from all the expectations, you know?" Jennifer looked at him, surprised by his perceptiveness. "You don't have to do everything she wants," Daniel continued softly. You're allowed to need space. You're allowed to take care of yourself." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her with those words echoing in her mind. Nobody had ever given her permission to prioritize her own needs before. It felt dangerous and liberating at the same time. The next day was a sea day, and Jennifer told her mother she needed to catch up on sleep. It wasn't entirely a lie. She was exhausted, but not from lack of sleep. She was exhausted from pretending, from carrying the weight of her mother's sadness on top of her own, from being the strong one when she felt like she was falling apart. She escaped to the Serenity Deck, an adults-only area where she could finally breathe without someone asking if she was okay. Daniel appeared with a bottle of water and set it down next to her chair without a word. Jennifer looked up at him, both grateful and confused. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said, sitting in the chair beside hers, but leaving space between them, respecting her boundaries in a way that made her trust him more. "You doing okay?" Jennifer didn't answer right away. Then, so quietly she almost didn't say it out loud, "Do you ever feel like you're disappointing everyone just by existing?" Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her. And she saw recognition in his eyes. "Yeah," he said simply. "I do." They sat in silence for a long time after that, and it was the most comfortable Jennifer had felt in months. Someone finally understood. Someone finally saw her. That evening, Jennifer found a message waiting for her through the ship's internal communication system. It was from Daniel. "Hope today was better than yesterday. You deserve days that don't feel like work." She stared at the message for a long time, feeling something shift inside her chest. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. She typed back quickly, before she could second-guess herself. "Thank you. Really." His response came almost immediately. "Anytime. I mean that." Over the next 2 days, Jennifer found herself seeking out Daniel more and more. Not obviously, but she'd take walks past the areas where she knew he worked. She'd time her meals to coincide with his breaks. She'd linger in the corridors, hoping to run into him. And each time they talked, she felt a little less alone, a little more understood. Daniel had a way of making her feel like she mattered, like her thoughts and feelings were valid and important. He told her about his own difficult childhood, about feeling invisible in a home where nobody really saw him. He talked about how he'd learned to be strong by depending only on himself, about how sometimes the people who were supposed to love you the most were the ones who couldn't give you what you needed. Every word resonated with Jennifer in ways that felt almost painful. He was describing her life, her feelings, her experience. But on June 12th, something shifted. Jennifer woke up feeling uneasy about how much time she'd been spending thinking about Daniel. He was a crew member, an adult in his 30s, and she was 17. This wasn't normal. Whatever this was, it felt wrong somehow, even though every conversation had been innocent. She decided to pull back, to create distance before things got more complicated. She avoided the areas where she knew he worked. When she saw him in the dining room that evening, she deliberately looked away. But that night, a message appeared on her phone that made her chest tighten with guilt. "Hey, I haven't seen you today. If I did something wrong, I'm sorry. That's the last thing I wanted." Jennifer stared at the screen, torn between the voice in her head, telling her to ignore it, and the pull she felt towards someone who finally understood her. She shouldn't respond. But the guilt ate at her, the thought that she'd hurt someone who'd only been kind to her. "You didn't do anything wrong. I just needed space," she typed, trying to create boundaries. His reply came immediately, and she could hear the hurt in the words. "I get it. I probably overstepped. Sometimes I forget boundaries because I actually care. I'll back off. I'm sorry." Jennifer read the message 3 times, feeling worse with each reading. He sounded genuinely hurt, genuinely concerned that he'd done something wrong. Before she could stop herself, she typed, "You didn't overstep. You've been the only person who actually listens to me." The response that came next would stay with her forever. "Then I'm really glad I met you. You deserve to be heard, Jennifer. You deserve so much more than you think you do." She fell asleep that night with her phone clutched in her hand, those words playing over and over in her mind. And she didn't notice that with each conversation, with each message, with each moment of understanding, Daniel was carefully constructing a cage around her. A cage made not of bars, but of emotional dependency and manufactured connection. A cage she wouldn't recognize until it was too late to escape. But how far was Daniel willing to go? And what would it cost Jennifer to find out? June 13th, 2018. Nassau, Bahamas. Afternoon. The ship docked in Nassau under a brilliant Caribbean sun, and the port came alive with color and noise, and the smell of fried conch and sweet rum. Vivian and Jennifer spent hours wandering through the straw market, buying postcards and cheap jewelry, eating from street vendors, trying to capture some version of the mother-daughter bonding Vivian had envisioned when she'd booked this trip. And for a few hours, it almost worked. Jennifer smiled at a joke one of the vendors made. She picked out a bracelet for her best friend back home. She seemed present in a way she hadn't been in months. They returned to the ship just before sunset, tired, but genuinely happy. And Vivian felt a flutter of hope that maybe this trip had been worth it after all. As they crossed the gangway, Daniel was there, scanning boarding passes with his usual warm smile. When Jennifer walked past, he looked up and their eyes met for just a second. "Have fun out there?" he asked casually. "Yeah," Jennifer said, and there was something in her voice that Vivian couldn't quite identify. It was good. Vivian was right behind her, and Daniel nodded politely before turning to the next passenger. Just another routine interaction, forgotten as soon as it happened. But later that night, as Jennifer lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. "Meet me on deck 3, crew access door, 11:30. I want to show you something. Trust me." Jennifer stared at the message in the dark, her heart pounding. She knew she shouldn't go. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was wrong, that meeting a 30-something crew member alone at night was dangerous and inappropriate. But another part of her, the part that felt seen and understood for the first time in years, wanted desperately to believe that Daniel was different, that he genuinely cared about her, that maybe, just one bunt, someone finally understood what she was going through. At 11:47 p.m., Jennifer stood outside the crew access door on deck 3. The hallway was empty and dim, most passengers either asleep or at the late-night show in the main theater. Her hands were shaking as the door opened, and Daniel stepped out, dressed in casual clothes, his shift clearly over. He smiled when he saw her, warm and reassuring. "Hey, I wasn't sure you'd show." Jennifer wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling very young and very uncertain. "What did you want to show me?" Daniel glanced down the hallway, then back at her with an expression that seemed almost vulnerable. "Come with me, just for a minute. I promise it's worth it." He opened the door wider, and Jennifer hesitated at the threshold. Every instinct told her to turn around and go back to her cabin, but she stepped inside anyway. The crew corridor was narrower than the passenger areas, more industrial. Pipes ran along the ceiling, and the smell of laundry detergent and machinery hung heavy in the air. Daniel led her up a stairwell and through another door, emerging onto a small outdoor platform at the very back of the ship, where crew members took their breaks away from passenger eyes. The view was breathtaking. The ocean stretched out endlessly under a canopy of stars, and the lights of Nassau glowed in the distance like jewels scattered across the darkness. Jennifer walked to the railing, momentarily forgetting her anxiety in the face of such beauty. "See?" Daniel said softly, standing close but not touching. "Told you it was worth it." Jennifer looked out at the water, at the way the moonlight danced across the waves, and for a moment she felt something close to peace. Daniel stood next to her, letting the silence stretch between them before speaking again, his voice lower now, more intimate. "You've seemed different the past few days, lighter, like you're finally letting yourself breathe." Jennifer didn't respond, but her throat tightened. Daniel continued, choosing his words carefully, each one precisely calibrated to hit its target. "You know what I think? I think you're starting to realize you don't have to go back to a life that doesn't fit you anymore." Jennifer's heart started pounding. "What do you mean?" Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a laminated card, a crew badge, holding it out to her in the dim light. Jennifer stared at it, confused and frightened. The photo wasn't of her. It was of some other young woman who looked vaguely similar. "What is that?" "A way out," Daniel said simply, and those 3 words hung in the air between them like a challenge and a promise. "I don't understand." Jennifer's voice was barely a whisper. Daniel stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with the salt air. "You told me you felt like you were suffocating, like no one at home really sees you, like you're just waiting for your life to start." He paused, letting her own words sink in, words she'd confided to him in moments of weakness. "I can give you a different life, a better one. We can leave together, tonight, before the ship sails in the morning." Jennifer's breath caught in her throat. "What? No, I can't do that. That's crazy." "You can," Daniel interrupted, his voice gentle but insistent. "You just have to trust me. I have money saved. I have a place we can go in Nassau. You don't have to go back to Atlanta. You don't have to go back to feeling invisible and drowning in your mother's sadness. You can finally be free." Jennifer shook her head, backing away from him. "My mom would be devastated. She'd think I'm dead." "Your mom will survive," Daniel said, and there was something harder in his voice now. "She always does. She's been surviving just fine while using you as her emotional crutch for the past year. But you, Jennifer, you're disappearing. And if you get on that plane back to Atlanta, you'll be gone completely. Is that really what you want?" Jennifer's hands were shaking violently now. She thought about her mother's face, the constant sadness that never quite left her eyes, no matter how much Jennifer tried to make her happy. She thought about going home, back to school, back to the same house with its heavy santua and unspoken grief, back to being the daughter who held everything together while falling apart inside. And then she thought about Daniel, about the way he listened without judgment, about how he made her feel like she mattered, about the possibility of starting over somewhere new, where nobody knew her and nobody had expectations of her. It was terrifying and tempting in equal measure. "If I do this," Jennifer whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the ocean, "what happens?" Daniel's expression softened, and he smiled the way he had that first day by the pool, warm and trustworthy. "We start over, just you and Misha. No one telling you who to be or what to feel. We'll build a life where you're free to figure out who you really are." Jennifer closed her eyes, and in that moment, exhausted and confused, and desperate for someone to tell her it was okay to be selfish, she made a choice that would haunt her for 7 years. She took the badge from his hand. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Daniel's smile widened, and he pulled her into a hug that felt like relief and trap all at once. "You won't regret this. I promise." But even as she said it, even as she followed him back through the crew corridors, with the forged badge in her trembling hand, Jennifer felt something cold and terrible settling in the pit of her stomach. This wasn't freedom. This was something else entirely. Something she didn't have a name for yet. Something that felt like the moment before drowning, when you're still above water, but you can already feel the current pulling you under. At 6:12 a.m. on June 14th, Vivian woke to an empty cabin and a nightmare that would last 7 years. And as the ship's crew searched frantically, as the Coast Guard was called, as Vivian's world collapsed around her, Daniel Ruiz stood calmly among the crowd of concerned passengers, his face arranged in an expression of appropriate worry. By noon, the conclusion was made. Jennifer Carter had likely fallen overboard during the night. By that evening, the ship was cleared to depart. By 3 months later, the FBI closed the case. Accidental drowning. No body recovered. Presumed dead. But Jennifer Carter hadn't fallen overboard. She'd walked off that ship with a man who'd promised her freedom and delivered captivity. She'd traded one cage for another, and by the time she realized it, there was no way out. How long would it take for Jennifer to understand what had really happened? And would she survive long enough to escape? March 19th, 2025. Nassau, Bahamas. U.S. Embassy. The conference room at the U.S. Embassy was cold and sterile, the air conditioning fighting a losing battle against the Caribbean heat. Agent Kevin Bowman stood at the front of the room, pointing to a digital map of Nassau displayed on the large screen, red pins marking locations where the viral photo might have been taken. Vivian sat in a chair against the wall, hands folded tightly in her lap, dark circles under her eyes from 3 nights of barely sleeping. She was running on coffee and determination and the desperate hope that after 7 years, she was finally close to bringing her daughter home. Agent Victoria Lennox, a specialist in trafficking and kidnapping cases who'd flown in from the Miami field office, pulled up a series of documents on her tablet. "We've confirmed the location," she said, her voice professional, but not unkind. "The photo was taken at Potter's Cay Marketplace. We've tracked Daniel Ruiz to a rental property in the Baintown area, about 15 minutes from where the photo was taken." Bowman clicked to the next slide, showing a small yellow house with a chain-link fence. "He's been using the name Gregory Foster, paying rent in cash, no paper trail, keeping his head down. The landlord barely knows he exists. Neighbors describe him as quiet, private, keeps to himself. No one's reported anything suspicious because nobody knows there's anything to suspect." Vivian stared at the image of the house, trying to imagine Jennifer inside it. "When do we move?" "Tomorrow morning, early," Bowman said. "But there's something you need to see first." He nodded to Lennox, who pulled up a document marked with the Carnival Cruise Line's logo. A crew supervisor's statement from 2018. Trevor Yang worked on the Carnival Dream during the cruise where Jennifer disappeared. He remembers seeing Ruiz talking to Jennifer multiple times. He even mentioned it to his supervisor, said something felt off about the attention Ruiz was paying to her. The supervisor told him Ruiz had a clean record and to mind his own business. Vivian's hands curled into fists. So people saw it happening and did nothing. "Unfortunately, that's often how these situations play out," Lennox said gently. "Predators are skilled at operating just below the radar, at keeping their behavior ambiguous enough that people second-guess their own instincts. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, it's already too late." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of all the missed opportunities hanging heavy in the air. Vivian thought about that moment by the pool when she'd watched Daniel talking to Jennifer and felt that flicker of unease. How many other people had felt the same thing and ignored it? How many chances had there been to stop this before it started? I failed her, Vivian said quietly. Bowman sat down across from her. You recognized danger and dismissed your instinct because you didn't want to be paranoid. That's human nature, especially when the danger is coming from someone who seems helpful and trustworthy. Ruiz counted on that. He built his entire predatory strategy around it. That doesn't make it okay. No, Bowman agreed. But understanding how it happened might help you understand that Jennifer isn't the only victim here. You were manipulated too, just in a different way. Vivian looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. When we find Jennifer tomorrow, what if she defends him? What if she tells us to leave? Lennox leaned forward. Then we'll have to respect that, at least initially. But Mrs. Carter, we've consulted with Dr. Patricia Morgan, a psychologist who specializes in cases like this. She's explained that trauma bonding isn't the same as love, even though it feels like love to the person experiencing it. Jennifer's attachment to Ruiz, if it exists, is a survival mechanism her brain created to cope with captivity. How do we break through that? Very carefully, Lennox said. We don't push. We don't force. We offer her choices and safety and support, and we let her come to her own realizations in her own time. It's not fast, and it's not satisfying, but it's the only way that works. That night, Vivian sat alone in her hotel room, going over everything one more time. The photos, the documents, the timeline. 7 years of Jennifer's life reduced to files and evidence markers. She thought about what Dr. Morgan had said during their brief phone consultation earlier that day. Your daughter survived by adapting. That adaptation kept her alive, but it also changed her. The Jennifer who comes home won't be the Jennifer who left. You need to be prepared for that. Vivian was as prepared as she could be. She'd read the case studies. She'd learned about trauma responses and recovery timelines. She'd accepted that this wouldn't be a Hollywood reunion with tears and hugs and everything magically fixed. This was going to be hard and messy and painful, and Jennifer might not even want her help at first. But Vivian had waited 7 years for this moment. She'd buried an empty casket and grieved for a daughter who'd never died. She'd blamed herself and broken down and rebuilt herself piece by piece. And tomorrow she was going to see Jennifer face to face and tell her the truth, that she'd never stopped looking, never stopped hoping, never stopped loving her. At 5:48 a.m. the next morning, Vivian sat in the back seat of an unmarked vehicle 2 blocks from the yellow house where her daughter lived. The street was quiet in that way that only happens just before sunrise, when the world holds its breath. Bowman was in the front seat reviewing the tactical plan with Royal Bahamas police force officers. Vivian stared out the window at the pale sky and tried to steady her racing heart. Ms. Carter, Lennox turned around from the passenger seat. We're going to move in about 10 minutes. I need you to stay in the vehicle until we've secured the premises and confirmed it's safe. Vivian's voice came out steady and final. No, I'm going in. Bowman glanced at her in the rearview mirror. They'd had this conversation 3 times already, and he knew she wouldn't back down. You stay behind us. You don't speak. You don't move unless we tell you to. Understood? Vivian nodded. At 6:02 a.m., the team moved. Vivian followed 5 steps behind as they approached the small yellow house with its faded paint and chain-link fence. The gate creaked when they pushed it open, and the sound seemed impossibly loud in the morning quiet. 2 Bahamian officers took positions at the back of the house while Bowman and Lennox approached the front door. Bowman knocked 3 times, firm and authoritative. Royal Bahamas Police! Open the door! Silence. He knocked again, louder. Still nothing. Bowman nodded to one of the officers with a battering ram. and Vivian held her breath. The door crashed open with a splintering sound that echoed down the street. Bowman entered first, weapon drawn. "Police! Anyone inside? Make yourself known!" The house was dim with curtains drawn tight against the morning light. The air inside smelled stale, like fear and secrets and years of hiding. Vivian stepped through the doorway on trembling legs, her eyes scanning the sparsely furnished front room. A worn couch, a small television, toys scattered across the floor, a child's drawing taped to the wall, a sippy cup on the coffee table. Evidence of a life, evidence of her grandson, evidence that Jennifer had been here all along. Then she heard it. Footsteps from the back of the house. A door opening. Bowman's voice, firm but not aggressive. "Step into the hallway. Hands where I can see them." Vivian moved forward, her body operating on instinct rather than thought. She reached the hallway just as a figure emerged from the back bedroom. A man. Tall. Dark hair. The same calm, trustworthy face she remembered from 7 years ago. Daniel Ruiz. Their eyes locked, and he didn't run, or panic, or show any emotion at all. He just stood there, watching her with a faint, unreadable expression. And then, from the bedroom behind him, another figure appeared. A young woman, mid-20s, thin and pale, with her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She was holding a toddler on her hip, the little boy burying his face in her shoulder. Vivian's knees buckled. The young woman stared at her, confused and wary, and Vivian saw it clearly now. The birthmark just below her left ear, crescent-shaped and unmistakable. Her daughter. After 7 years of grief and guilt and desperate searching, her daughter was standing right in front of her. Her voice came out as a broken whisper. Jennifer. But would Jennifer recognize her? And after 7 years of living in Daniel's shadow, would she want to come home? The hallway was too narrow for the magnitude of this moment. Vivian took a step forward, her hand reaching instinctively toward her daughter, and Jennifer pulled back, clutching the toddler tighter against her chest. The boy whimpered and buried his face deeper into Jennifer's shoulder. "Jennifer," Vivian said again, her voice breaking. "It's me. It's Mom." Jennifer's expression was a war of emotions, fear, confusion, recognition, and something else Vivian couldn't name. Daniel stepped forward smoothly, positioning himself slightly in front of Jennifer, like a shield. His voice was soft and reasonable, the same voice he'd used to gain everyone's trust 7 years ago. "You need to leave. You're scaring her." Bowman moved his hand to his holster. "Mr. Ruiz, step away from her. Now." Daniel didn't move, his eyes locked on Vivian. "She doesn't want to see you. She hasn't wanted to see you for 7 years. I saved her from you." Vivian flinched like she'd been struck, but she forced herself to look past Daniel, directly at Jennifer. "Baby, I've been looking for you every single day. For 7 years. I never stopped. I never gave up on you." Jennifer's face crumpled, and tears started to fall. But she didn't speak. The toddler began to cry softly. Sensing the tension, Daniel turned to Jennifer with an expression of tender concern. "You don't have to do this. You don't owe her anything. Remember what we talked about how she used you?" Jennifer looked at him, then at Vivian, then down at the child in her arms. Her voice came out small and fragile. "I don't know what's happening. I don't understand." Vivian took another step forward, forcing herself to stay calm. "Jennifer, I know you're confused. I know this is terrifying, but I need you to hear me. I failed you on that cruise. I felt something was wrong when I saw him talking to you, and I ignored my instincts. I told myself I was being paranoid, And because I didn't trust what I felt, I lost you." Tears streamed down Vivian's face now, 7 years of grief and guilt pouring out. "I have lived with that failure every single day. I buried an empty casket because I thought you drowned. I blamed myself for not protecting you. And I'm so sorry." Daniel's jaw tightened, the calm mask slipping. "She doesn't need your guilt. She needed you to see her 7 years ago, and you didn't. I did. I was the one who saved her." Vivian's eyes snapped to him, her voice rising with 7 years of rage. "You didn't save her. You groomed a vulnerable 17-year-old child. You manipulated her into leaving her family. You isolated her in a foreign country and kept her prisoner for 7 years. That's not saving. That's destroying." Daniel's expression remained calm, but something cold flickered underneath. "I gave her a life where she mattered, where someone actually saw her instead of using her as an emotional crutch. You were so wrapped up in your own grief that you couldn't see your daughter was drowning right in front of you." He turned to Jennifer, his voice softening. "I saw you, Jennifer. Really saw you. When everyone else looked past you, I was there. I gave you what she couldn't. Purpose. Safety. A home." "You made her believe she had no choice," Vivian said, her voice shaking. "You spent weeks identifying her vulnerabilities and exploiting every single one. You gave her a prison and called it freedom." Jennifer's breathing quickened, her face torn between them. "He took care of me when I had nowhere to go," she said, her voice barely audible. "Because he planned it that way," Vivian said, forcing herself to speak calmly. "He made you feel like you had no one else. But I did care. I do care. I never stopped caring about you." Jennifer closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face, and Daniel sensed the shift happening. His calm facade cracked, and desperation bled through. He lunged for the toddler, trying to pull him from Jennifer's arms. "Come on, we're leaving, right now." Jennifer pulled back, confusion and fear warring on her face. "What are you doing?" "We're leaving," Daniel repeated, his voice sharp and urgent. "Out the back. We have to go now." Bowman stepped forward. "You're not going anywhere, Mr. Ruiz." Daniel reached for the child again, and the little boy screamed. And something in Jennifer that had been dormant for 7 years suddenly woke up. She turned her body, shielding her son from Daniel with fierce protectiveness. Her voice rose, stronger than it had been in years. "No! Stop!" Daniel froze, staring at her in shock. Jennifer's voice was louder now, steadier. "Put your hands down. We're not leaving." Daniel's expression shifted to something darker. "Jennifer, listen to me. You're not thinking clearly. They're manipulating you." "No," Jennifer said again, and this time she looked at him fully, clearly, seeing him without the filter of 7 years of manipulation. "I'm done listening to you. I'm done with all of this." She looked at him and finally saw him for what he was. Not her savior, but the man who'd stolen her life and called it rescue. The man who'd kept her trapped and called it freedom. "We're done," she said quietly, and those 2 words held 7 years of captivity and survival. Bowman moved quickly. 2 officers stepped forward and pulled Daniel's arms behind his back. He didn't resist, but his eyes stayed locked on Jennifer. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "You'll come back. You always do." Jennifer didn't respond, just held her son tighter as they led Daniel away. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, and then he was gone. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the toddler's soft crying and Jennifer's ragged breathing. Jennifer stood in the middle of the hallway, still holding her son, her whole body trembling violently. Vivian didn't move, terrified that one wrong step would shatter this fragile moment. But then Jennifer looked up, and their eyes met across the space that felt like both inches and miles. Jennifer's face crumpled completely, and she took one shaky step forward, then another. And then she collapsed into her mother's arms, with the toddler pressed between them, both women sobbing so hard they couldn't breathe. Vivian wrapped her arms around her daughter and held on like she'd never let go. "I'm sorry," Jennifer whispered over and over through her tears. "I'm so sorry, Mom." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Vivian said fiercely. "Nothing. Do you hear me? This wasn't your fault. None of this was your fault." They sank to the floor together, still holding each other. And for the first time in 7 years, Jennifer Carter felt like she might actually be safe. Outside, the sun rose over Nassau, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Inside the small yellow house, a mother and daughter began the long, painful journey of finding each other again. But would the road to healing be harder than either of them imagined? 2 months later, May of 2025, Atlanta, Georgia. Jennifer sat in Dr. Patricia Morgan's office, staring at the floor, the same position she'd held for most of their sessions over the past 6 months. The room was carefully designed to feel safe. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, tissues always within reach. Dr. Morgan, a trauma specialist who'd worked with captivity survivors for over 15 years, sat across from her with patient, understanding eyes. "It's okay to feel conflicted," Dr. Morgan said gently. "It's okay to grieve what you lost, even if what you lost wasn't healthy." Jennifer's voice was barely a whisper. "I keep thinking about him, about Daniel, and I hate myself for it." That's completely normal. What you experienced is called trauma bonding. When someone controls every aspect of your life, when they become your only source of survival, your brain adapts. It bonds with that person, not because you want to, but because you have to. Jennifer wiped her eyes. "So I didn't actually love him?" Love and trauma bonding aren't the same thing, even though they feel identical. Real love gives you freedom. What Daniel gave you was captivity dressed up as care. Dr. Morgan leaned forward. "What you're feeling is your mind trying to make sense of 7 years of manipulation." Jennifer's voice cracked. "What about Ethan? Sometimes I look at him, and I don't know what to feel. He's innocent, but he's also a reminder of everything that happened. Every time I see him, I see Daniel." Dr. Morgan's expression softened. "One of the cruelest things about what was done to you is that Daniel tied your trauma to someone you love. Loving Ethan and struggling with what he represents can both be true at the same time. That doesn't make you a bad mother. It makes you human." At home, Vivian tried to help in every way she knew how. She made meals Jennifer barely touched. She cared for Ethan while Jennifer went to therapy or sat on the porch for hours, unreachable and lost. The bureaucratic nightmare of restoring Jennifer's legal existence consumed Vivian's days. Social Security, driver's license, birth certificates for Ethan. Jennifer Carter had been legally dead for over 6 years, and bringing her back to life on paper required endless paperwork and court orders. Some nights, Jennifer cried until she couldn't breathe. Other nights, she just stared at the ceiling, trapped between then and now. One evening, Vivian sat beside her on the couch. "Can I ask you something? On the cruise, when he started talking to you, why didn't you tell me?" Jennifer was quiet for a long time. "I didn't know I needed to. He made everything feel normal. And by the time I realized it wasn't, I was already too far in. I believed him when he said you wouldn't understand." Vivian reached for her daughter's hand. "You could never hurt me more than losing you did. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to see what was happening. You were 17 and being manipulated by a predator. That's not your fault." Vivian squeezed her hand. "I'm the one who should have protected you." They sat in silence, Ethan's soft breathing audible from the next room. Jennifer's voice broke the quiet. I don't know how to be here. I don't know who I am anymore. For 7 years, I was Daniel's girlfriend, Ethan's mother. Now I'm supposed to be Jennifer Carter again, but I don't remember who she was. Then don't try to be her. Be who you are now. We'll figure it out together, one day at a time. Jennifer nodded. It wasn't healing. Not yet. But it was a beginning. And the trial that would determine Daniel's fate was about to begin. July 28, 2025. U.S. District Court, Northern District of Georgia. The courtroom was packed with journalists, victim advocates, and members of the public who'd followed Jennifer's story online. Vivian sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap, her eyes never leaving Daniel as he sat at the defense table in a pressed suit, looking like any other defendant. Polite. Calm, unassuming. Not like a predator. That was what made him so effective and so dangerous. Daniel Ruiz had been charged with kidnapping of a minor across state and international lines. International parental kidnapping. Transportation of a minor with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity. Sexual exploitation of a minor. Identity fraud. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping. And deprivation of parental custody rights. If convicted on all counts, he faced a minimum of 45 years in federal prison, with a maximum of life without the possibility of parole. On the 4th day of the trial, Jennifer took the stand. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, her hair pulled back, looking younger than 24 and impossibly fragile. Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Travers approached her gently. Jennifer, can you tell the court how you met Daniel Ruiz? Jennifer's voice was quiet but steady. On a cruise in 2018. I was 17. He was a crew member. He seemed nice at first. Can you describe how your relationship with him developed? Jennifer's hands twisted in her lap. He talked to me. He made me feel like someone finally understood what I was going through. My parents had just divorced. My mom was really depressed. I felt like I was responsible for keeping everything together, and it was exhausting. Daniel made me feel seen. Did he suggest you leave the ship? Yes. On the last night of the cruise, he told me I could start over, that I could have a different life in Nassau, where I didn't have to carry everyone else's problems. He made it sound like freedom. Did you want to leave your mother? Jennifer hesitated, tears forming in her eyes. I don't know. I was confused. I felt trapped at home, but I loved my mom. Daniel made me believe that leaving was the only way to stop hurting, that staying would destroy both of us. The defense attorney, Mitchell Horn, cross-examined carefully. Ms. Carter, you testified that Daniel didn't force you to leave the ship. Is that correct? Yes, but just yes or no? Please. Yes. And you lived with him for 7 years. You had a child with him. Did he ever physically restrain you or threaten you with violence? Jennifer's jaw tightened. Not with words or physical force. Then how were you held captive? Jennifer looked directly at Daniel for the first time since entering the courtroom. He didn't need to lock me in a room. He controlled everything. I had no money, no identification, no way to contact anyone. I was in a country I didn't know, with no resources and a child to protect. He didn't need chains. The cage was invisible, but it was still a cage. The prosecution called Dr. Amelia Brennan, a clinical psychologist specializing in trauma and coercive control. She explained grooming methodically, how predators identify vulnerable targets, isolate them emotionally before isolating them physically, create dependency through control of resources and information. Trauma bonding, Dr. Brennan explained to the jury, is not a choice. It's a survival mechanism. When someone controls your access to basic needs and human connection, your brain bonds with that person, even if they're the source of your harm. Jennifer Carter didn't stay with Daniel Ruiz because she loved him. She stayed because he systematically removed every other option. The trial lasted 3 weeks. On August 12, 2025, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict, guilty on all major counts. Daniel's expression didn't change. He simply nodded, as if he'd expected it all along. As if even this, his conviction, was part of some larger plan. Only he understood. On September 24, 2025, the sentencing hearing brought everyone back to the same courtroom. The Honorable Patricia Caldwell, a stern woman in her 60s who'd presided over countless federal cases, reviewed the file one final time before speaking. Her voice was measured, but carried the weight of absolute authority. "Mr. Ruiz, you exploited a vulnerable child for your own gratification and control. You stole 7 years of her life. You deprived a mother of her daughter and a young woman of her future. You did so with calculation, manipulation, and a complete disregard for the devastating harm you were causing." She paused, looking directly at Daniel. "This court sentences you to 55 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." Daniel was led away in handcuffs, but not before turning back one last time to look at Jennifer. His expression was unreadable, but Jennifer felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. Even in defeat, he was trying to maintain control, trying to make her feel like she owed him something. She looked away. 3 weeks later, Jennifer received a letter. It was postmarked from the Federal Correctional Institution in Terre Haute, Indiana. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Neat, precise, the same handwriting that had written notes for her over 7 years. Her hands trembled as she held the envelope, and for a moment, she considered opening it. Part of her desperately wanted to know what he'd written, what he thought he could possibly say to her now. But then she thought about Demerit Morgan's words. Healing means choosing yourself over the pull of trauma. It means recognizing that some voices don't deserve to be heard, no matter how loud they are in your head. Jennifer walked into the backyard where Ethan was playing in the fallen leaves, giggling as Vivian helped him make a pile to jump into. She stood there for a moment watching them, this grandmother and grandson, who were building their own relationship separate from all the pain. Then she walked to the metal trash can at the edge of the property, held the letter over it, and lit it with a match. She watched the paper curl and blacken, watched the ink that formed his words turn to ash and smoke. She watched until there was nothing left but gray dust that the wind carried away. And when it was gone, she walked back to her son and her mother and the life she was slowly, painfully learning to build. September 28th, we5. Lake Lanier, Georgia. The sun is just beginning to rise. The water is still and glass smooth, reflecting the soft pink and orange of early morning light. Jennifer sits on a wooden dock with her bare feet dangling just above the surface. Ethan is curled up next to her, wrapped in a blanket with his small body rising and falling with the rhythm of sleep. Vivian sits quietly beside her daughter with her hands resting in her lap. She doesn't speak, doesn't push, just sits. The silence between them is different now, not empty, not heavy, just present. Jennifer watches the light spread across the water. She's been home for 6 months. Some days are easier than others. Some nights, she still wakes up disoriented, reaching for a life that doesn't exist anymore. But she's here. She's alive. She's learning how to be Jennifer Carter again. She turns to her mother with her voice soft. "I didn't know I was missing until I saw myself in that photo." Vivian's eyes fill with tears, but she doesn't look away. Jennifer continues, "I thought I had chosen a life, but I didn't choose anything. I just disappeared, and no one could find me because I didn't know I needed to be found." Vivian reaches over and takes her daughter's hand. "You're found now." Jennifer nods. The sun climbs higher. The world begins to wake. And for the first time in 7 years, Jennifer Carter feels like she's home. Jennifer's story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how predators operate and how easily they can hide in plain sight. Daniel Ruiz wasn't a monster lurking in dark alleys. He was a helpful crew member, a friendly face, someone people instinctively trusted. He understood that the best way to capture someone isn't with chains, but with carefully constructed emotional dependency. The warning signs were there. Multiple complaints filed and dismissed. A pattern of inappropriate attention toward teenage girls. That moment when Vivian felt uneasy watching him talk to Jennifer by the pool. But systems designed to protect often prioritize convenience and liability over safety. And instincts get dismissed as paranoia until it's too late. Jennifer wasn't naive or stupid or weak. She was 17, vulnerable, and being systematically manipulated by someone who'd done this before. She made choices, yes, but they were choices made in a context carefully constructed to eliminate all other options. That's not consent. That's coercion. And here's the question we all need to sit with. The one that should make us deeply uncomfortable. How many times have you felt that flicker of unease about someone's behavior and dismissed it? How many times have you seen something that didn't feel quite right but told yourself you were overreacting? How many Jennifers are out there right now being groomed by people who look trustworthy, while we all look the other way because acknowledging danger is uncomfortable? Daniel Ruiz is behind bars. Jennifer is home. But there are countless others like him operating in plain sight on cruise ships, in schools, in churches, in families. They're charming. They're helpful. They know exactly what to say to make vulnerable people trust them. So what do we do about it? Do we trust our instincts even when it's uncomfortable? Do we speak up when we see concerning patterns? Do we believe victims even when their stories are complicated and don't fit neat narratives about captivity and escape? Jennifer survived, but how many others don't? And what are you willing to do about it? Was Jennifer a victim from the start, or was there a moment she could have walked away? Drop your answer in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another one. And if someone in your life needs to hear this, share it. Because sometimes the people who are missing don't even know they need to be found.